Welcome to the Hollywood in Toto podcast, the right take on entertainment. The HiT cast offers a weekly look at Hollywood from a conservative point of view. Sick of media bias infecting Hollywood headlines? Tired of stars insulting your views? HiT has your back. Now, here's your host, Christian Toto.
Welcome to episode 99 of the Hollywood in Toto podcast, the right take on entertainment. This week we're speaking with Dan Glass. He's responsible for some of the most amazing special effects in movies today. Think those Matrix sequels, Batman Begins, and most recently, Deadpool 2. He'll break down that film's really tricky stunts and also share more about his amazing career. This week's show is sponsored by Speakeasy Ideas. Here's a message for homeschooling families from Dr. Thomas Krannawitter, president of Speakeasy Ideas. Freedom is never more than one generation away from being lost, depending in large measure on how free citizens educate their children. And while we have no shortage of problems in our modern United States, the future is brighter and more hopeful due to the good work to which you've dedicated yourself, teaching your children. Speakeasy Ideas wants to be your partner for homeschool civic education. That's why we've introduced a new online civics course complete with curriculum titled The Political Science of the American Founding. This course will help your student become prepared for the rights and duties of being a citizen by learning the political science behind the great American experiment in constitutional self-government. The Political Science of the American Founding is the result of Dr. Krannawitter's own scholarly research and writing, combined with years of experience teaching American government at Claremont McKenna College, Hillsdale College, and George Mason University. The materials included in this course have been selected, arranged, and packaged to supplement any kind of curricula. You can easily modify these materials to be used for many learning levels, ranging from young students all the way to high schoolers. To learn more about this new online civics course for homeschoolers, I invite you to go to speakeasyideas.com/homeschool. And congratulations to you and your homeschooling children, and thank you again for your good work and your interest in a sound civic education. Well, 2018 is just about over. I guess it's a good time to reflect on the year in entertainment. Do we have to? It was a year when the movies did bounce back, at least at the box office, a real reversal from 2017. And of course, free speech took a hit and another hit. From Kevin Hart's oh-so-brief Oscar hosting gig to attacks on shows that haven't even been shot yet. Yes, I'm talking about HBO's Confederate, which will probably never see the light of day after all that debate. Meanwhile, over at the MCU, Marvel movies kept on rocking, while DC movies stumbled again with Aquaman. But you know what? It kind of doesn't matter. Aquaman's making a lot of money, and even really tepid superhero fare like Venom crushed it at the box office. I always thought that our hunger for superhero movies would die down eventually. I'm sure it will. Not yet. I think it actually might be growing. On another front, Hollywood got very, very angry with President Donald Trump again. They bared their teeth in a way that really showed more projection than insight. It got ugly. I don't know how it can get even uglier, but anything's possible, and 2019 is just around the corner. So where are we headed next year? Well, more sequels, more reboots, more retreads, but you know what? That's partly our fault. We keep showing up, we keep lining up, we keep paying good money to see them. Well, Hollywood's message is keep them coming. That's exactly what's going to happen. We'll also see more attacks on free expression. Absolutely no doubt. The pendulum that's swinging against free expression, it just hasn't begun to swing back yet. Maybe by the fourth quarter of 2019 we'll see some change, but right now I don't see any indication that things are going to reverse course. The fact that the baby it's cold outside wars were won on the good guys' side, that's great, but it seemed like the exception that proved the rule. On the podcasting front, well, I'm going to keep on working on this show, but there's other shows that really kind of show the potential of the medium. I wanted to single out a previous guest, Patrick Corelchi, and his Red Pilled America. By golly, I listened to every episode, and each one drops my jaw. Not just the fact that it's good, and it is, but just the stories they're telling, the sources they're tapping, and the fact that no one else is coming close to that level of approach when it comes to news, specifically from a right-of-center perspective. It's great. And naturally, there's more streaming shows coming our way. I have to say, Netflix and Amazon and Hulu doing a wonderful job creating some very high-quality content. Not every show is a hit. Not every movie is a hit. But overall, just tremendous quality. Stuff that you used to see on the big screen, now we can get it in our home. Love it. Keep it coming. I don't think there's any sign of that's going to slow down either. And I think it's just wonderful. Looking back at the overall year, I've been maddened by a lot of stuff. Some of the stuff we just mentioned. Others, I don't even get into. It just makes my blood boil. But there's still so many great shows out there, so many interesting movies, and accessing them has never been easier. There's so much choice in our lives. We watch things when we want to watch them. I just love that selection, that ability, that freedom. And at the very least, even if 2019 is another depressing year on a lot of creative fronts, that will continue and even get better. Now, if they can only find out a way to make my tablet's battery charge a little bit longer, I think things would be all good.
You're listening to the Hollywood in Toto podcast, the right take on entertainment.
Here's the hit tweet of the week. Scott Derrickson is not a household name, but he's a pretty good director. He was behind Doctor Strange. He signed up to make the Doctor Strange sequel. Can't wait for that. And he also pretends to be a man of some intellect and common sense on Twitter, but boy, this week he sent out a message that seemed to really indicate that is not quite the case. And to be fair, once you hear the story he shared, I suspect it's a work of fiction too, but you can be the judge of that. Post-dinner chat with my NRA-supporting, AR-15 defending, Trump-voting, ignoramus brother-in-law was all good and friendly until I had to make clear to that redneck a-hole mother blanker that he has blood of many children on his hands. That's what Christmas is for, right? Suffice to say, he deleted that tweet soon thereafter. I wonder why. My hit tip of the week is Mars Attacks. I still can't understand why this 1996 movie wasn't a bigger hit. I think maybe the cast was to blame. Look at it. Jack Nicholson, Glenn Close, Annette Bening, Danny DeVito, Michael J. Fox, Jim Brown, Tom Jones, Natalie Portman, and a young Jack Black. Blinking you'll miss him, but he's there. And it's all directed by Tim Burton, who's a hit or miss kind of a guy, but I think this is him at his goofiest. I suspect when the movie came out with all those big names attached, well, maybe the expectations were just too sky high. What movie can kind of produce the laughs, the thrills, the outrage of that cast? It just didn't measure up. But watching it today with all that pressure, all that hype removed, it's just a good old-fashioned time. And what I like about Mars Attacks is that it's so clear that Tim Burton loves this material. He's poking fun at old-fashioned sci-fi movies. He's dabbling in some pretty cool special effects. I love the creatures in this film. It's just a good sense of fun. It's movie making with his heart in the right place. And I think that really shows in every frame. Maybe not everything works here. There are some moments of dark comedy I don't think were really successful, but I had a blast with this film. I introduced it to my kids about a year or two ago. They loved it as well. It holds up in the best of ways. Just not a classic, only a very, very good, goofy movie. Mars Attacks is streaming right now on Amazon Prime.
You're listening to my daddy's podcast. Hey, still ate sandwiches with the crust cut off.
Now, let's get to this week's HitCast interview. Dan Glass started out as an architect. Today, he's the go-to visual effects guy for movies like Deadpool 2, Batman Begins, and The Tree of Life. He's got a lot of amazing movies on his IMDb page, and you know what? He's working with the best of the best, not just the directors, but the special effects gurus. The movies he works on are incredible. I think Deadpool 2 is a great example. We love Ryan Reynolds, we love the humor, but it's the special effects, amazing and streamlined and as real as possible, that do make the movie pop. I've kind of been itching to interview someone who works in the FX field for a while for the HitCast, and I was really tickled when I saw Dan Glass's name on a press release recently. They offered him out to people who wanted to talk to him, and I jumped at the chance. Dan's a good guy, loved the conversation, and had some really interesting insights about how the special effects happen, stuff that we take for granted but make every movie even better. I hope you enjoy this HitCast chat with Dan Glass. You think about space, artist interpretation, creativity. On the surface, it seems like there's some overlap, but what did you experience when you kind of made that shift?
Yeah, it wasn't necessarily a choice in order to lead into this. So, one thing did happen kind of more circumstantially after the other. But, I mean, as with many subjects, and especially artistic ones with artistic bents, there are a lot of things that carry over. And I think particularly the fact that architecture is this a very tight blend between technology and science and the artistic expression of that. And the visual effects side of the film business is very much about that also. It's about trying to interpret the aesthetic or creative visions and apply the necessary tools and the latest technologies to that in a way that hopefully people are less and less aware of. So, those, I mean, as you say, they're kind of broad generalisms, but I think that they're skill sets that that training definitely, helped with. There are also some more specific things in terms of how light works and like the path of the sun and so how to make sure that a background matches a foreground and again, things you can pick up elsewhere, but it comes very much in part of training in architecture.
When you made the shift to that kind of work into more FX, was it natural? Was it something you've always been curious about? I was kind of curious. I mean, some people at the age of 4 say, I want to be an actor. I want to be a comedian. But from your sort of personal journey, was there a kind of a shift or a kind of a gradual evolution to, hey, this is something that I'm good at. I've got the skills. I've got the wherewithal, and I can make that transition.
I think I was more of a kind of a bit of a jack of all trades, and I had an artistic mother and a scientist father, and so I always loved the way that the two things worked in the world, together or sometimes against each other, and that's what led me into architecture originally. And when I was there, one of my colleagues studying was really into how architecture was represented in film, and that was sort of his thesis. And I, from that, I was fascinated with film itself, and had kind of never really considered it as a proper career, and yet thought, hey, wait a minute, why not take a look? And it was just at the advent of really what visual effects has become today. It was very, very early origins back then, and I stumbled across a company that was just beginning to develop and build the technology for themselves, because there was nothing off the shelf available. And so it was this really fascinating, exciting time to just sort of get in there. No one had the answers to things. A client would come in and say, well, we're sort of looking for this, and you literally had to go, yes, we have the balls to do it. And as soon as you got the contract, you then had to figure out exactly how you were going to do it. But that was exciting, and it's sort of been like that. Really for the majority of the years in the business, because you keep getting pushed further and further with these projects.
The list of your credits are just incredible as far as the scope of the project, the directors you worked on. I want to focus a little bit on Deadpool 2. I read that you said that the scene where Domino parachutes to Earth was the most challenging. Can you break down why? Because I don't think watching the movie that scene jumped out as being so complicated. But you've got to make it happen. What was so tricky about that particular sequence?
Oh, I think what that comment probably refers to is actually the shot where she lands in the city.
Okay.
So yeah, the sort of skydiving sequence itself. Certainly, you always have challenges making that feel real, because even stunt actors on wires and cables, trying to get them to feel like they're not on wires and cables is always a bit of a challenge. But when you put actors in them as well, it's not a very comfortable place to be, and so trying to help them feel comfortable and yet feel like they're actually skydiving is an art form. A lot of work of which is down to the special effects and the special effects riggers and the stunts themselves. But the shot where she lands, there's like one single shot which was added relatively late in our schedule, which was why it was probably one of the biggest challenges we faced. And the way it had to be approached was an entire digital environment behind her, and we had something like 10 or 12 weeks, if I remember it right, to put the whole thing together, which was pretty breakneck, and even in an important movie for the summer.
Yeah.
So that was really the challenge behind that, and making that feel real, especially when the rest of the movie, and one of the things that I hope comes across in Deadpool 2, not unlike the first one, but it's very much part of the way David Leitch likes to work, which I respect hugely, is to try to shoot things in situations, go to real locations, build really, convincing looking sets, and not rely where you don't have to on, blue screen and CG, backgrounds and environments. And I mean, obviously it works more in worlds that can fit into contemporary kind of locations or locales or things that you can find places that represent those. But we went to great lengths to find interesting spaces, buildings, streets, etc. And so when the movie is built around that, it just harks back to why that was such a challenge to then insert a fully digital shot, which, if we'd had more time, and I think if we had envisaged the shot sooner, then we would have tried to do something in like a motion control camera in a real street, for example. But
Gotcha.
It just wasn't able to do that in the time.
Well, you kind of hinted at something. I think there was a tension that was really brought out, I guess, in the public with the Star Wars reboot, the sort of the practical effects versus the CGI. Is that sort of is that a dance or a tension that you kind of come up with all the time with your work? Because maybe often CGI is easier and better, but there's still that. Sometimes I think the audience just clues into the real, the stuff you can touch. And is that sort of one of the things that you kind of concentrate on with your work?
Yeah, I think that the world's audience has become very clever, and they can see even the best visual effects can look like visual effects, and sometimes it's even if it visually you couldn't exactly put your finger on what it is about it. It's just because there are things in reality that when you're deliberately building and precisely putting something together, it just has a different feel to it than something that is more a product of circumstance or chance, or it's very hard to recreate that deliberately.
Yeah, the mistakes are often to your advantage, really, when
exactly.
Yoda's ears on the Star Wars films were the way they kind of flop because it was a puppet. I think that the CGI people recreated a little bit of that because it had that imperfect glints. But
yeah, so I mean, whether because people are aware of those things or just from certainly my personal taste, I really respect filmmakers and love to put reality into the frame somewhere, and as much as possible, as most of the frame as possible. And I think most of the work I've been involved in has, with maybe a few exceptions, like something like Speed Racer, which was deliberately a very kind of sort of pastiche of images. But even there, all of that was based on real photography of real places. So although we made it very kind of cut up and artificialized, it had a very deeply grained basis in the real.
Yeah, and it looked amazing as well. I was looking at some of the directors you worked with: Christopher Nolan, Quentin Tarantino, Terrence Malick. When you're working with a director maybe you haven't had a relationship with, like you mentioned David Leitch you've worked with before, does it take time to get on the same page, to get in sync creatively with what he or she wants and what you need? What's that like? As far as is there sort of a feeling out process where you kind of eventually come to the same position where this is what we need?
Naturally, and I mean, I think like any kind of working or even social relationship, you don't automatically enter into understanding the person that you're communicating with. Obviously, it's key with a filmmaker who's got a very clear vision and idea, and a confidence in what they're speaking about, that your trade, that your craft, and that you can adapt around what they are looking for. And part of what I always try to do is understand that whatever the end goal, the way you get there is a big part of the solve. different filmmakers will walk a different line to get to that end result. And your role as a visual effects supervisor is to kind of find the right path that helps support their vision and helps them understand what will get there, and build a trust, so that sometimes if it's sometimes filmmakers aren't very technical, so you need to sort of present enough things in front of them that they can understand the process, but they also put trust in you to kind of deliver the goods.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the most sort of abstract kind of relationships for me was working with Terrence Malick, who an absolutely fascinating, amazing individual, and I love working with him very much. But we would sort of venture off into talking about music and musical score sometimes to get to the root of imagery, if that makes any sense. Like that would sometimes be the route to getting an understanding of what he was looking for.
When you think about special effects today, as a casual observer, I look at the screen and I say, anything is possible. I mean, we've, in the recent Star Wars films, they recreated Carrie Fisher and the British Peter Cushing as well. I mean, it's marvelous and shocking, and it's just fun to see how much it's evolved in the last few years. Are beyond the complexity of a sequence, are there types of stunts or effects that still are kind of out of reach for you and someone of your skill level? Is there sort of still a holy grail that we can't do this yet, but we'll get it to it someday?
I mean, I think it would obviously be way too arrogant to assume any different than that. And I think that performance, that there is an art and a delicacy to performance, and what an actor or a stunt performer brings to the action on camera or the drama on camera, that you can labor away for hours and days and months, and you're not going to get to that. We can't all be, whoever, Cary Grant or Tom Cruise, in terms of how they emote, behave, move. They aren't automatically things that we all possess if we just work hard enough at it. There is a kind of talent that some people have, or at least an individuality that some people have, that seems to appeal to us in terms of the actors that we look to on the screen. Uh-huh. So that in particular, I don't really see the digital world replacing that or learning to kind of replicate that. Replicate maybe, in the sense that if you have the underlying performance, the ability to kind of take somebody's performance and then repeat it and literally replicate it, mm-hmm. I do think that gets better and better all the time, and that we will get to a stage where it will become very, very hard to discern. But I think that it will and should inevitably still be derived from an underlying real performance. And I guess what I'm getting at is that if you take a tremendously talented actor and you have a way of recording how they emote, speak, express, and then you transplant that into a scene that they were not in, mm-hmm. that ability to do that, I think we're very close with. And I think we've seen examples of that have been really impressive, whether it's things like the Apes movies with Andy Serkis and the likes. So those things I think are really exciting, what visual effects can do. But the thing I've always loved about its evolution as a technology and an art form is how it's improved its ability to reduce the technical aspects, if that makes sense. Like 15, maybe 10 years ago, it was still a very technical process that kind of almost put sort of dead weights on iterations of the creative. And now I think we're at a stage where the processing speeds of machines and the knowledge and talent of the visual effects artisans is such that you can iterate quicker, you can work in a way that is more flexible around creative needs, and so it's opened the sort of tools to more creative filmmakers and less technical ones, and I think that that's very fascinating, and what we begin to see out of that world is awesome. It's
yeah,
really
I imagine
exciting.
in 10 years this conversation would go even further in that development. I was kind of curious. You work with different actors on the films, and Tom Cruise is famous for doing his own stunts, and there are other actors I'm sure either have more affinity for the effects or maybe less so. Is there a particular actor you've worked with over the years that really got what you were trying to convey to them, just understood the process, were very fluid, kind of rolled with what needed to be done, that you can kind of mention, and why do you think they clicked so well with the process?
I mean, I have to say that especially for the time that we were doing it, I would particularly hark back to the team that we had on Matrix Reloaded and Revolutions, because Hugo Weaving is amazing and just very down to earth, very kind of understanding of the process. Keanu, for all the various things that people say about him, is incredibly focused and committed, and Carrie Ann as well. Like Carrie Ann, I remember doing this thing where she sat in a chair and we put a motion control camera around her head, and all of the movement of her body and the camera had been transcribed into the camera movement of the motion control camera. So basically she was sat there stationary and the camera did all this moving around, and she had to mimic an eye line as if her character were tumbling in space. It was very bizarre, and to ask an actor to do that. And we also had them doing this thing where they had to sit still in a chair with 5 cameras around them and act as if they were being punched but not move their head. And things like that we wouldn't have to do that anymore because we've got better tools. But those actors were incredible sports and did awesome stuff for us within that context.
Wow. Okay. Well, before we let you go, I had one last question. When I was watching movies in maybe, I guess, the 90s or so, Terminator 2 jumps out at me as something that kind of pushed FX beyond what I had seen. The Matrix movies did that as well, and even Jurassic Park with the dinosaurs. What do you see as sort of next on the horizon? What might be dazzling us in a couple of years, or what do you see as either the technology or maybe even the fruits of that technology that we'll see moving forward?
I think there's sort of two broad frontiers, and they're rather differing, actually. One is the one that just takes us to increasingly varied and different worlds, and I think of the likes of the Avatar films, which just literally transport us into kind of wholly convincing environments that are otherworldly, literally. And so I think that those movies will be very interesting and incredibly visually exciting from that point of view. The other is actually how much we can take the technology to make movies that are seemingly, not about the visual effects, but that it is integral. Whether it is about the way that Apes has done to bring these characters that, of course, couldn't speak or behave in that way, and to take that to increasing levels of kind of creatures or forms that fit and sit into what might be otherwise relatively ordinary kind of movie stories, but that have a whole different kind of meaning to them because there is a character that wouldn't be there, and yet that it's done so subtly. And I mean, even things like Ex Machina, were variants on that, but I think that there are going to be other kind of evolutions of that in the years to come.
Yeah, and I agree. It's amazing to watch as an observer. And Dan, you're on the forefront of this, so thank you so much for joining the HitCast. Of course, you can get Deadpool 2 right now on home video, and you're working on Hobbs and Shaw, the Fast and Furious spinoff, which will be coming in August of 2019. Thank you for your time. I love your work, and keep making the impossible possible on the big screen.
Yeah, and everybody go watch the new version of Deadpool that's coming out. It's supposed to be very funny. So,
all right. Thanks again.
Very good.
Well, thanks again for listening. Don't forget to check out HollywoodandToto.com for both the show notes and, of course, the latest entertainment news. Please follow me at Twitter at HollywoodandToto. And we'd love it if you leave a podcast review over at iTunes. See you next week.